Hello and welcome. We will get started momentarily. Welcome as you're joining in here. We'll get started a couple minutes after 1 just to make sure everybody gets on here. We'll give it about 1 more minute just to make sure everyone gets a chance to join in before we start. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Leah Strevel. I am the events manager here at Innova Payroll. Innova Payroll is a national employer solutions company headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, with 11 offices throughout the U.S. Innova provides a full portfolio of payroll and HR services, including HR outsourcing and employer benefits. To learn more, visit innovapayroll.com. For attending today's 1-hour webinar, you'll receive NASBA, SHRM, and HRCI credit. You can expect to receive your certificate as well as the webinar recording early next week. During the webinar, please feel free to submit any questions at the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. Any questions we can't get to, we will follow up with you afterwards to make sure we get those answered. To introduce today's speakers, we have John Thompson, Vice President of Business Development at Innova. John?
Sorry, thanks, Leah. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speakers, Shub Sidhu and Darcy Tor. Shub serves as Vice President of Growth at Zayzoon. He was born in St. John's, Newfoundland, and moved to the West Side to grow up in Edmonton, Alberta, where he completed his engineering degree from the University of Alberta. Shub believes strongly in the financial wellness mission that Zayzoon is on. While Zayzoon's growth is his primary focus, everything he does is anchored on the fact that at the end of the day, Zayzoon should continue to improve the financial health of your employees. Darcy is the co-founder and CEO of Zayzoon and previously served as president and co-founder of Spira Data Corp. Darcy founded his first software company, Halo Networks, in 2000 and exited in 2004. He served as past chair on the board of the Missing Children Society of Canada and has been a director since 2011. Before turning the floor over to them, I'd also like to add that Zayzoon's Innova's partner for early wage access, and something that really stood out to us during our evaluation process was their commitment and mission to drive employee wellness. So that's something I'm really excited to hear them talk about in more detail today. That said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to them. Thanks, guys.
Hi, John. Thank you very much, and Leah for the intro. As John mentioned, it's Shub here, and I'm going to start off our conversation today talking about I think most folks on this call are running a business, helping run HR to business, running payroll to business, any one number of those things. This is a stat that obviously really spoke to us here at Zayzoon from the past couple of years, but 42% of small business leaders are reporting experiencing some kind of burnout. Now, obviously, there's been lots of different reasons for that since 2020. Businesses opening up, closing, managing cash flow, managing different changes in tax, payroll, et cetera. So 42%. So that means out of Darcy and I, one of the two of us is stressed and one of the two of us is not. I won't tell you which one. So my question and our first question for the day, because it's going to be an interactive session, is you will now be presented with a poll question, which is that 42% number. Do you think that number is high, low, or just right? Are more business owner operators, leaders stressed than that, or less, or is 42% the right number? Just going to give us a minute here while everybody takes an opportunity to answer the question. Okay, so some early results are in. So 57% of you said that 42% number is too low. 36% said it's just right, and 1%, 7% said it's too high. So what that tells me is that over 90% of the folks on this call think that that's a pretty accurate number in terms of our ambient stress level. Now, I talked a bit about some of the reasons that that stress level has increased over the past couple of years, obviously related to a lot of the pandemic related events. But what we find in talking to a lot of our clients, partners, etc., right now is that one of the principal sources of that burnout or stress is the hiring, recruitment, and retention of employees, particularly in certain industries, service, hospitality, restaurant, manufacturing, logistics, over and over and over again. Of course, we're seeing the information out in the world, in the news, but empirically, we're hearing repeatedly from our business leaders that we work with, HR folks, payroll folks, talent, recruiting, that this is very, very difficult. Now, I did mention in certain industries, like Zayzoon is obviously a technology, financial technology company. We've added 20 people over the last couple of months here. And I can tell you, just from our perspective, this is very, very true across the market. So one of the biggest sources of stress that we're seeing right now from the employer network that we work with, the client network that we work with, is recruiting and the retention of employees and remaining engaged with them. So all kinds of different things I'm sure we're seeing in the market for folks trying to improve their ability to recruit. Just an example of phones being given away, a lot of short-term tactics. Our point of view at Zayzoon is that ultimately what we're trying to do is attract folks to work in a job sustainably and for a long time. So some of these approaches might work, but are they ultimately going to not just work for recruitment, for retention? So it's a bit of background on owning and operating, running a small business, the current level of burnout. And what I wanted to do for a second here was turn it over to Darcy, because Darcy has had much more experience owning, operating, running businesses than I have, and wants to explain a bit about, as it relates to that, like stress level and shift in employee dynamics, like how he has navigated that in his career and how he's arrived to where he is at today. So Darcy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to stop my video here, and we'll let Darcy take over.
Thanks, Job, and thanks everybody for having us on today. Yeah, it's a big question as we think about this, especially in the environment that we're all navigating right now. But I actually want to start with kind of an experience I had as a summer student working for a large oil and gas company here in Calgary. So it was a $30 billion public oil and gas company, and the CEO was standing up at the AGM. So, they had a few thousand employees there and shareholders in the room. And the CEO said, does everybody in the room here know what our most important asset is? So there's a $30 billion public oil and gas company. And so somebody got up and said, well, isn't it obvious? It's the natural resources that generate the revenue for us, oil and natural gas. And the CEO said, wrong. The most precious resource we have are our people, the people moving up and down the elevators in our office building today. And I thought, this was back, I don't want to admit what year it was, but I thought that was an incredibly insightful comment from that CEO at the time, where the world was quite different back then. And I think that statement applies more today than ever, because we're living in a world where that power dynamic has shifted between us, the employers, and the labor market that we're trying to recruit and retain. It's fundamentally a transformative shift in how we need to think about our workforce and the relationship that we have as employers with our employees. And when I think about how we found our why at Zayzoon, it started with my previous company. I built out a company. We started this in 2004 after I'd exited my previous company, Halo, we built out a field services platform, and it was really very much like a payroll company. We built the ability for companies that had field services, so oil field service companies, landscaping businesses, you name it, anyone that had a workforce that lived and worked outside of the office. And we built a platform where they could capture their revenue, billings, payroll, and costs on an iPad or on a remote device. And when that device realized a connection, it would get all of that information back into the office. And why was that important? That was important in these businesses because how do businesses survive? Businesses survive by generating revenue. And that's not the survival aspect yet. Of course, it's sending out invoices and getting paid for said invoices. So our platform was really designed to optimize how businesses got funded, right? By way of their revenue, which is generally the best funding source and sustainable funding sources for businesses. And what we learned as we started working with businesses, and we're processing more than $3 billion in transactions for our clients, what we learned was these businesses were suffering from the same cash flow problems that employees are today as it relates to the problems that Zayzoon is solving for. So they needed to fund the operations of their business, and they do that through invoicing, of course, but they also do that by delaying how they pay their staff. And as we started to dig into how people used our software in the field, and we started to get to know our field users, because we're a very user-centric organization, we started to see these struggles. So we're solving for these businesses and their cash flow needs. They're managing their cash flow by way of paying payroll every 2 weeks, often even paying vendors 60, 90 days past the invoice date. I think we can all relate to some of those challenges. And so we started to get really curious about, well, we're starting the top of the waterfall where these businesses are dealing with cash flow challenges, but then we saw the human aspect, like actual people having trouble putting food on the table, having trouble paying rent, or seeing their car break down and seeing that they need their car to get to work, but they don't have money in the bank to fix their car so they get to work and earn money. And we thought, well, this is a terrible situation. We started to kind of get more curious about it. And then we realized it's not only terrible, it's pervasive. It's an epidemic, and it's something that we don't talk about. People are embarrassed to talk about it. And so we started to shift our thinking. So I started to work with our current co-founder here at Zayzoon, Tate Hackard, who brought me this thesis that if we could leverage technology to really put an employee's pay in their own hands rather than their employer's hands, it would provide a level of freedom. It would improve that employee's health, and certainly provide benefit to the employer because they've now got a workforce that is less stressed. And so we started to look at this, and I said, well, I don't understand. This is a problem that's obviously been around for a long time. What are the options? And Shub put it the best way that I've ever seen. When we look at the options that employees were using prior to companies like Zayzoon, they were, quote, awful. And these options are still around. We still have customers. We still have employees, of course, that are using these options. So we've got the payday loan market, where there are more payday loan companies in the US than McDonald's. In fact, there are more payday loan companies in the US than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. So it really illustrates how pervasive this issue is. And then my thinking was, well, we've got banks with these incredible balance sheets. Why are they not helping customers? But if you look at the traditional banking system, they want one customer with $1 million. They don't want 1 million customers with $1. That's how they've built out their revenue model. Now, if I'm a customer with just a few dollars and I can't pay a utility bill and that bounces, that's a $30 to $40 charge on my bank account. And if you look at how banks generated revenue off the back of those workers that can't pay their bills, they generated over $17 billion on NSF and overdraft fees in the US. So we're looking at this and we're thinking to ourselves, there's got to be a better way, a way that actually puts that person who's got that problem, presents an elegant solution to that person, and leaves them in a better financial position. So as we started to look at this, we thought, well, what other avenues are there? There's mom and dad, there's friends and family, and of course, there are employers. And so when we started Zayzoon, we actually went to businesses. I went to my customers at Spira and said, hey, are you providing cash advances to your employees? What is that like? And we were surprised at the answer. So I think this is a great question that we'll ask you here today. How many of you are being asked for cash advances from your employees? Yeah, that's not a surprising stat to us. And Shub, I think if we move on to the next slide here. So when we went out to our customers at the time, and discovered that there were so many employers that were in fact offering their employees cash advances, and it was something that was the human aspect. Hey, this is an employee, this is somebody who I know and I care about that has a need and that's in trouble. So how can I help them solve for this? And we can see here that we've got 17%. So we've got an employer that's doing it. We've got a number that aren't, and it's not uncommon. But what we do find that in most of our experience, they're going to those egregious lenders, the payday lenders, or they're stuck and they're NSFing and overdrafting their bank account. So it's a problem that we've become quite passionate about. And me as an entrepreneur, that ESG, like having a business that's really driving home the social impact of helping employees achieve a better sense of financial comfort and stability, is an easy thing to get up and spend the day working on. And I think we all feel the same way here at Zayzoon.
Awesome. Thank you, Darcy. So just to reiterate a bit of that data, so it said 25% of folks are being asked for cash advances and 16% are offering them. So I thought that was an interesting piece of information to ask the group, because like we're going to get into a little bit of maybe why that's important. So, Darcy talked a lot about overdraft, NSF, payday loan shops, and they presented some general data about the market around the types of services that folks are using, that are impacting their, I don't hesitate to even use the term financial wellness, because financial wellness is often a term associated with people who have money. Like this is what's like financial stress, like the type of stress when can you actually afford to, kind of put food on the table that night. And so when we look at the employees that we interact with, like the data becomes even honestly more alarming, I suppose. So, general data across the market will tell you, 10 to 12% of folks use payday loans. When we talk about the folks that Zayzoon serves, so typically right in the hourly workforce or the lower income workforce, almost 40% have used payday loans. Over 40% are spending more than $75 a month on additional bank or late payment fees. And they're telling us only about 13% of businesses are offering cash advances. And that aligns with maybe the answer that we got here today. And it also makes total sense. Like you shouldn't be managing cash advances yourself. Like, most companies I'm sure on this call today have one or two HR payroll people running off cycle pay, managing advances, having loan policies, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things you probably aren't able to do and shouldn't be doing. And but it is kind of just an interesting situation that we find ourselves in terms of the demographic that we deal with. And so some other really interesting things about the employee demographic that we deal with is, as you can imagine, most make less than $3,500 a month. 70% are working another or a secondary job to make up to, an additional $1,500 a month. So that is like a massive number. And I'm sure you folks all see this in the folks that you hire and retain. So it means not only are you competing for talent from a hiring or recruitment perspective, you're also competing for talent on a, which one of the jobs am I going to work at this weekend? So again, anecdotally, we hear a lot from employers that, again, some of their personal stress is being dealt with. Yeah, I've got a full schedule for this weekend that I've filled up all the shifts. I have people no showing or switching shifts or doing other things because, they're taking that secondary work that they usually work on, but at a busier time, so they can potentially drive more income. And then, over 80% of the demographic, like their income doesn't even account for a lot of their sort of like basic monthly expenses. So, when we talk about financial stress and the cash flow shortfall, we aren't talking about folks who don't have money to go, to go clubbing. We're talking about folks who don't have money to buy food, medicine, necessities, groceries. And so that's ultimately kind of, on top of the general market data, these are some of the things we're dealing with. So it's important for us as employers to understand, because I talked to one example already. We are dealing with productivity loss from financial stress. We are dealing with recruiting difficulty because of people not wanting to take jobs that are inherently can be stressful on top of that financial stress. And we're dealing with retention because folks might have access to secondary sources of income or other opportunities, or jobs that might have more flexible pay. So what we're starting to see from the market is business owners are starting to realize that they need to maybe start to think about payroll a little bit differently and how they offer payment to employees. So Darcy mentioned again earlier, like historically, biweekly pay cycles are tied to employer cash flow. Well, employees increasingly are asking the question, well, why can't I get paid as I work? So we are definitely seeing that pay methods, pay frequencies, pay availability, pay flexibility ultimately is something that employees are starting to look for. So again, this is across the entire market, not even the smaller demographic of folks that we serve, but almost 30% talk about the ability to get flexible pay or same day pay. Would make a significant difference in their decision to accept a job. So, that's a pretty big number for what is in effect a voluntary benefit. So we are definitely starting to see, as Darcy mentioned earlier, with the balance of power shifting between the employee and the employer, there is a lot more interest in the employees being able to take control of their cash flow, save money versus some of those other services that they might historically have had access to. So, really, that this is very much just data we're starting to see out in the world. Now, I'm going to ask another poll question. I know I've asked you a few already, but has anyone here been asked about same day pay, on-demand pay as an employee that might have come from somewhere that used it or is offering on-demand pay today? We'll give it another minute here. So we're seeing 18% say yes, 82% say no. So that's pretty close, right, to like the number that might have been asked for advances. I think we saw 13%, maybe slightly higher. So, one of the things that we often find with this is they probably won't ask you about on-demand pay in the same way that they wouldn't come to you and ask for an advance, because there's often can be a stigma associated with that. Maybe like, oh, the employer will, or my boss will think I don't know how to manage my finances, not that this is something that would benefit me. So, we definitely see that too, right? Is that, 30-40% of employees usually will access an on-demand pay solution, but as you can just see, only 18% of you folks have been asked about it. So they're not going to be the first discussion they have when they're struggling for funds, but where you'll then end up sort of receiving that message is when they kind of maybe have to go across the street, right, for a slightly higher paying job or role. So as we're dealing with this employee financial stress, cash flow, the flexibility in pay, like, what can we as employers do to help sort of address like some of these employee concerns and some of these employee issues such that it'll help us with our ability to recruit, retain, etc. So first and foremost, this probably obviously is fairly obvious, but we collectively have to be as competitive as we can be with pay and benefits. Now, that's not always easy. So for example, depending on who you're competing with for your talent, it's difficult. So if you're running a series of restaurant franchises that maybe have employ 500 people, you're not going to have maybe the same assets as your disposal as like Target or Walmart that might be competing with for the same folks. Here at Zayzoon, we see that in a different way. Obviously, we're competing for tech talent, and we're competitive with other companies that are at our stage. But ultimately, it's going to be difficult for us to be competitive with a Salesforce, for example, or an SAP in terms of competitive pay and benefits. So the key is like be as competitive as you can be, given the means you have at your disposal, the market you're in, the area you're in. Folks like Innova, I know, are obviously super helpful with things like that to help to understand what the competitive pay and benefits look like. Flexible wellness programs. So we're starting to see this sort of shift again in the employee balance of power, as Darcy alluded to it earlier. And employees really, really do want flexibility and control. And we're not just talking about pay here. We're talking about all kinds of different benefits. So, we have a couple of partners that we work with that, kind of take a sort of a spending account type approach to flexible benefits, so that employees, especially for voluntary benefits, can pick and choose sort of what they have access to within a certain realm. So these things, like I know back to earlier conversation, the free iPhone might feel like it's the best way to go. But a lot of from sustainable employee engagement and retention, like flexible programs or being as flexible as you can be is really, really important. And then when it comes to folks kind of managing their finances as best they can, even within the means that they have, there is still definitely an opportunity to provide further access to tools that allow employees to better understand and better manage their finances. What does their net pay look like? One of the really interesting things that we found about talking to our folks who access Zayzoon is one of the most frequent reasons they give us for accessing the app as frequently as they do is actually to get a real picture on how much they're earning, what their net pay is going to look like. So understanding, they're keenly aware of what they're going to be paid and what they are making. And then further tools that we can offer, to help with, things like, budget setting, different financial opportunities and programs they can take advantage of. So just understanding what's out there for them to support them. So offering financial education toolkits is definitely something, obviously, that we do and we like to see happen. And a note here, as Darcy mentioned on the banks earlier, banks are, I think his quote was, the bank's like one customer with $1 million, not 1 million customers with $1. We see a lot of that, honestly, in the financial wellness and financial education space too. Like a lot of companies' financial wellness or education programs are designed for people who have money, not for people who don't. And again, same sort of reasons as we alluded to on the banking side of things. So financial education platforms that are really geared towards those folks that are trying to manage cash flow and manage expenditures is another key thing that we as employers can do. So what I did want to kind of get into a bit was there's a lot of questions that I know the folks at Innova get and we get around, okay, if one example of that flexibility is flexible pay or on-demand pay, how do these types of programs typically work? And so there's kind of basically three main components to an on-demand pay program, because, and I'll kind of maybe compare it to the analogy being, okay, let's say everybody on this call had said, we're prepared to do cash advances for employees. So what would you do for a cash advance program in-house if you had one? There's a few things you would probably do. One is you would, make sure that you guys had cash flow, sufficient cash flow to run a cash advance program. You would need template agreements with employees, like for repayment. You would also need to demonstrate that your cash advance programs were equitable and non-discriminatory. You would have to make sure that you understood terms, rates, repayments, the regulatory environment, and then of course your personal financial risk and liability. So in a nutshell, an on-demand pay program addresses most of that on your behalf. So the first thing that on-demand pay programs, an on-demand pay platform will need to do, or an on-demand pay provider, is have an integration with the payroll or HR systems that you are running today. So then that integration can be many different ways. You'll see different options out in the market. You'll see people who require you to maybe upload or download files. You'll see automatic integrations. You'll see different kinds of integrations that integrate with your platform. But those are necessary because for an on-demand pay provider to be able to offer flexible pay to your employees, that has to be via a payroll integration, payroll data integration, because otherwise all you're doing is potentially like trying to offer a similar service that a payday loan company will do. And on-demand pay providers that are operating the right way are trying to put those types of companies, make them irrelevant, not be just like them. So the first thing we want to do is we integrate with payroll HRIS. That's like the key. The second is that on-demand pay provider will need to calculate and understand what the employee is earning as they work. And then ultimately, the purpose of an on-demand pay provider is to provide that cash flow so the employee can get paid as they work or on demand. And that cash flow doesn't come out of the employer's bucket. So like, as Darcy mentioned earlier, part of the reason payroll exists in a biweekly or monthly type schedule or weekly is that the cash flow alignment between employer receivables and the ability to pay employees. So like a on-demand pay provider, earned wage access provider calculates the amount available, make sure that they can fund those early wage payouts, and then ultimately provides the ability and access and support for your employee to be able to have an app that they can have that type of control over. So we often describe on-demand pay as it's imperfect. It's an imperfect solution. It's significantly better than options that they have out in the market. And then the biggest thing that it does is it gives employees that financial flexibility and control over what is that they're trying to do. We just spent a lot of time talking about employee stress, not understanding, so not having access to the monies that they need for cash flow. But such an important part of that is not even knowing that you have a safety net, right? And so that's really how we think about on-demand pay. So this is like a more detailed slide for any of the folks that might work in payroll HR about the mechanics of how some of these on-demand pay solutions work. But ultimately, there's integration. The employee can come in through a portal. Employee goes through a security process of identity validation and creation. Then data is gathered from the payroll and HR systems. So we don't and you shouldn't have an on-demand provider that gets all that data until that validation and identity validation has occurred. That amount is used by the on-demand pay provider to calculate what the employees earn, what they have access to. Those funds are sent to the employee by the on-demand pay provider, and then those funds are automatically recovered on a next pay run. So this is like the mechanics of how on-demand pay should work for you as you're starting to evaluate or looking at these types of things to try to improve employee pay flexibility. Now, let's say that you've some of you being asked about on-demand pay. Maybe this is the first time you've heard of it. Maybe you drove by another restaurant that has a poster up saying that they're offering employees on-demand pay, and you're starting to think about how you evaluate on-demand pay programs that you should maybe look to incorporate. So Obviously this is something we've been doing for quite some time, and obviously we're a vendor, but we also have seen lots of things in the industry. We work closely with a couple of other competitors and partners in this space. Everything that an on-demand pay solution provider should be anchored on two things. One is leaving the employee in a better financial position than we found them, and reducing the employer stress level as it pertains to, or at the very least, not increasing employer stress, but maintaining ease of operation and maintaining the ability to recruit and retain. So let's talk a bit about a few of those things. So most of the folks that we talk to, especially with, as we're partnered with companies like Innova, is around ease of implementation. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and guess that much like Zayzoon, you do not have an army of payroll and HR people at your various organizations. If you're lucky, you've got 2 or 3 people that are working that function, or you have one person that does all of those functions. So when it comes to financial wellness programs, flexible pay programs for your employees, ease of implementation is absolutely essential. You cannot bring a benefit or service in-house that you then subsequently have to spend 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 weeks of your own time working on. And also, this is something you want to be able to offer as quickly as possible. If you're in a tight, competitive recruiting labor market scenario right now, ease of implementation and speed of implementation is essential, because you can't, and you probably won't be able to put a lot of time into like manually exchanging data from your payroll system to an on-demand pay provider. So quick and easy implementation, and that also will benefit you from being able to, to leverage this as something that you can use in that talent competition as quickly as possible. This is a big one, obviously, for us, and something we're particularly attuned to. But when we started in this space, there was only a couple of providers doing on-demand pay. Obviously, there's many more now, and that's a positive thing, because at the end of the day, it's better for employees to have an on-demand pay or flexible pay option than it is some of the legacy services that they have access to. And there certainly are some on-demand pay solutions or things out there that you have to make sure are operating in the right way. And so the right way is, ultimately, are we doing something that's beneficial for an employee? So some of the things to look for are, when they calculate earned wages, are they doing it on an accrued basis or just for that day? So if you see a company that is only offering wages earned just for that day and not on an accrued basis, they're basically trying to encourage employees to pay more in fees, right? To use the service more frequently. So it's a really important aspect, is like, you want to put a service like this out that obviously helps you from a recruiting perspective, say, hey, we offer flexible pay, but from a retention standpoint, you want employees to really, really like the solution that they're using, and that solution should do right by them for 2 reasons. One is it's the right thing to do, and the second is it's going to help those employees be happier and stay longer. So is it good for your employees? Should really be an anchor evaluation of anything that you're looking at. Now, the effects on cash flow. So again, if you all were sitting on mounds of cash, honestly, you would probably be able to pay or run advanced programs in-house out of your own cash flow. But again, the benefit of using an on-demand pay provider should be 2 things. We are improving the employees' access to cash to mitigate their cash flow issues, and we are not impacting the employer cash flow issue. So like, we are not going to a restaurant that at best might have 17 days cash on hand and saying, you know what, you have to front all the on-demand pay, flexible pay pieces. Like, what's the point, right, of doing that? So like, make sure that it actually, obviously improves the employee cash flow, but has no impact on your own cash flow. This probably goes without saying, but instant access. So employee flexible pay programs, we are trying to address a real-time cash flow stress issue for employees. That does not work if all they can do is get paid, a few days later. the folks that we talk to, oftentimes they're looking for that flexible pay option because they're in line at the grocery store, for example. So the instant access to funds is really, really, really critical for the employee experience. Then flexibility. I think I've probably said the word flexible 300 times during this presentation. But flexibility, flexibility, flexibility is key. So employee pay programs or flexible pay programs, for example, that mandate or require an employee to put all their funds to a new card are typically less successful because, again, it's not just about having access to pay, it's about that employee control and flexibility. So when you're evaluating on-demand pay providers, is there flexibility? Can an employee put it to their bank card, to their bank account, to a pay card, to other services or options that will help serve them better financially? So flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. And truth be told, increasingly, like when we look at our benefit programs that we offer at Zayzoon, flexibility is a major part of everything now that we look at from evaluation. Folks that are looking at health spending accounts instead of medical benefits, want that type of flexibility. So I will continue to say the word flexibility until it's the only word that you can hear me say. And then finally, security. Again, you're working with a financial technology provider, either integrating with your payroll systems. Are they SOC compliant? These are some of the things we collectively think about. Now, this is a question we get quite often, or we talk a bit about in terms of like when evaluating on-demand pay programs, what are some of the things we need to think about from what the regulatory landscape looks like? So as you can imagine, Zayzoon is very, very close to this. We work with a different network of folks staying on top of things, but we're starting to see, and it's in our opinion, an affirmation of the market need for earned wage access on-demand pay, that we're starting to see proposed legislation and starting to see both at a state and federal level. So that's really, really, really positive, because back to my earlier point about evaluating on-demand pay programs that put employees in a better financial situation, we believe that a regulatory framework for EWA is not only welcome, but is needed. So really, really positive. It'll start to increasingly give more and more folks clarity. California is supportive of this. So we're seeing a lot of positives from a legislative and regulatory framework perspective. Now, what are some of the key things that we look at? One is, when you're looking at on-demand pay programs, they are truly on-demand or earned pay programs, not employee loan programs. Employee loan programs are a different thing. Employee loans are giving access to employee funds from what they may earn in the future beyond this pay period, not what they're earning during this pay period. So the emphasis on earned wages, not future wages. A real big key is the relationship with the employer payroll provider. So I mentioned earlier that integration of data in exchange with an on-demand pay provider is absolutely essential, because otherwise it's just the loan product at the end of the day. If we are not integrating and we're not using data, then both from a regulatory perspective, from a technology perspective, they aren't the same thing. So there are consumer products out there, like direct-to-consumer products, that say, hey, Shub, like sign up for this service and then, upload your pay stub and we'll provide you access to some funds. Well, that's a payday loan, right? I mean, that's a payday loan. It just happens to have a slick sort of tech name for it. But the data should be coming from an integration with the payroll system and or like a manual data exchange from the employer. And then specific pieces to the customer. So non-recourse, no credit check, no collection. So if an employee has an advance out, their funds were insufficient to cover those funds, it does not become a loan product or credit product. Like otherwise, it's not earned wage access. So these are really, really key tenets to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about programs like this and what the kind of keys to look for, because we're starting to see the frameworks being established, and obviously happy to answer any questions that might come up about this either during the call or beyond. Okay, so that's like what people, we all agreed employees are stressed. We are all stressed. We've looked at what on-demand pay is, like how to evaluate on-demand pay. We looked at a bit of the regulatory framework. It's a question we get all the time is like, what do people use these things for? So, something that I want to stress, I think sometimes, again, there's like a bit of a notion that we're all guilty of if we're not living check to check, the first default thought for a lot of people is, oh, the folks are just blowing their money on stuff, right? And I've heard that many times over the years, right? I won't maybe lie, like even the first time Darcy and I talked about this idea that him and Tate were working on 7 or 8 years ago, I didn't know anything about the payday loan industry. I didn't know anything about how common it was. I kind of thought, oh yeah, you budget, right? Well, I mean, that's not that's not true. I mean, I've learned and I've been turned around in that regard. It isn't just folks are, going on the way home and picking up like a 6-pack, like, 60% are using it for groceries, necessities, medication, utilities. 19% are using it for like things like my car broke down, like Darcy, the example Darcy provided earlier. And then another 19% are just directly using it to pay off like more egregious sort of like interest or loan products. So, definitely from a need perspective and what folks use it for, we are definitely seeing in just the general like use of on-demand pay, it's not being used recreationally, it's being used out of necessity. So then ultimately, what does this mean? I mean, this is Zayzoon data specifically, but I'm sure we could talk to any of the on-demand pay providers and that are operating in a positive or forthright manner, and we would start to understand a bit of this. Is like that there is a significant reduction in stress levels for folks that have access to on-demand pay. And the reason I say folks that have access to on-demand pay and not folks that use on-demand pay is that we have seen lower reported stress levels from people who've used this very, very infrequently. And to the point at which they are reporting that their stress level is lower, not only like if they've actually had to recently use Zayzoon, but their stress level is lower just knowing that they have a flexible, like controllable on-demand pay sort of safety valve that they can use if they need it. So, I mean, that's probably been out of all of this for us, one of the most eye-opening things is that, yeah, we expected like, oh yeah, you used this last week, of course you're going to report your stress level is lower, but we're just generally seeing that employees report lower financial stress, period, knowing that they have access to this thing. And so that's like a positive affirmation for us, but B, it means a lot of different things. So one is like, if the employee is less financially stressed, and we know the type of financial stress that folks are going through is like as short of like, a serious medical diagnosis, this is just right up there with their stress levels. So we know if that financial stress is being reduced, they are going to be not only financially healthier, but physically healthier. We all know the impacts that stress has on people. So again, Zayzoon's anchored on doing the right thing and, for people, but financial stress is lower, people are healthier. Now, what does that mean for us as employers? So if my financial stress is lower, back to the earlier discussion we were having around like looking at different payment options or job options, if my financial stress is lower, I'm more likely to be engaged at work. I'm more likely to stay at work, and I'm more likely to pick up shifts at work. So, this reduction in stress touches a lot of different things. And then finally, from your perspective, like, 42%, almost half of us have said that we're stressed. If this financial stress means that employees are more likely to work, less likely to leave, that's going to have a positive impact on employer financial stress, employer stress and employer financial stress. So ultimately, when we talk about what the value of on-demand pay is that, kind of to sort of summarize, and I think you heard us sort of regurgitate a bunch of the points, is that there is a financial stress and cash flow epidemic. Affects so many people. It affects people we all know. It affects people who work for us. It affects people who work with us. It affects people we work for. It is pervasive and it is everywhere. We are also dealing with an unprecedented era of small business owner stress over the last 2 years, especially. So stress. And as employers, something that we can potentially do to help employees is not only going to help mitigate their stress, it's going to have the sort of ambient impact of reducing our own stress. And so obviously we at Zayzoon feel that on-demand pay is one of those employee self-control and flexibility things that helps them, but also serves the employer. And, we really view it as, from a payroll HR perspective, where we see things going in the next few years is not just, hey, this is a flexible benefit, that this will be, ultimately like table stakes. It'll be part of payroll. And so, we're happy to answer. I think I've talked everybody's ear off and said the word flexibility and stress so many times that they're the only 2 words I can hear anymore. But I did want to thank everybody for everything that we've gone through. And I wanted to maybe, Leah, turn it over and see if there was any questions that came up or if there's any questions that anyone has.
Great. And thank you guys so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm definitely one of those people who feel financially stressed. So I get it, but I appreciate the flexibility from Zayzoon and other, different early wage access options. So are there any questions today? Anything at all? All right. Well, I guess we'll just let you guys go a little bit early here then. But I do hope you have, you guys really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions right now? I apologize. I know my volume was not up all the way. All right. Since there are not any questions, I do want to remind you guys, you'll be receiving your certificates with the activity IDs, as well as a recording of this webinar early next week. If you do have any questions about Innova or Zayzoon, feel free to send anyone at Innova or us an email, and we'll forward that on. We appreciate your time today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. As you exit, there will be a survey that pops up in your Zoom window. If you have a few minutes, it will just take about 3 minutes. Just respond to that survey. That'd be really helpful. We appreciate you so much. Thank you again.